family, but he's really adopted the Baltimore area and the Baltimore literary scene, and he's even adopted me, and I just really appreciate that, Mr. Gerry Gross.
Thank you, Carla, for the introduction. This occasion is one where I'm meeting the author, although we met last night for the first time, but I'm meeting him as you are. Jerald Walker is an associate professor at Bridgewater State College, which is just outside of Boston, and he is teaching English Lit there and creative writing. His work has appeared in the Best American Essays, published by Houghton Mifflin, the volume of 2007 and 2009, and the Best African American Essays of 2009. And he's also contributed to Mother Jones and recently to an anthology, a collection of the work of many prominent writers, all who've had brothers. And so the title of the book is Brothers, Stories of Love and Rivalry. He and his wife live in Bridgewater, and they have 2 sons. My daughter this morning just happened to send me an email, and it was an email of the TED YouTubes, which some of you may be familiar with, and it was a replay of the acceptance speech that Steve Jobs made at Stanford University when he was received an honorary degree in 2005, and it just was released by Stanford in December of last year. It's a very interesting speech, and he makes one point. When we talk about connecting the dots, we cannot connect the dots of the future, but we can connect the dots of the past. And I just want to touch on those dots for a moment, because for me it was the fall of 45. I was just coming out of the service, and I got my first job in publishing at a firm that most of you haven't heard of called Raynal & Hitchcock, but they had many prominent authors, and such as Saint-Exupéry, who published Little Prince, and Mary Poppins, and a great novel by Malcolm Lowry called Under the Volcano. And they also had under contract a new writer whose work had appeared in some magazines, and he was contracted to do a novel. And the novel was due just about the time I arrived. It eventually got published by Random House in 1952. The editor of that book, who also hired me at $50 a week, over the years became my closest friend. And since he was the editor of Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, he and I and Ralph, over the years, became good friends, with our wives often going off to dinner together and so on. So there's been some new interest in Ellison, of course, because scholars have been resurrecting some of his unpublished work ever since Juneteenth was published a few years back, and now we've got a volume of over 1,000 pages entitled 3 Days Before the Shooting, all of which I expect that Ralph would have been terribly pleased with. He was a perfectionist and very careful when he sent out his work to the public. But back at the time of Juneteenth, Michael Pakenham, who used to write for The Sun when The Sun had a much better book page, he wrote of Invisible Man as a classic act of truth. It is impossible to be a responsibly sentient American or seriously to hope to understand America without having read and thought about this book. The first 4 sentences constitute one of those rare passages in prose or poetry that cry out to be memorized, and I quote them. I am an invisible man. No, I am not a spook like those who haunted Edgar Allan Poe, nor am I one of your Hollywood movie ectoplasms. I'm a man of substance, of flesh and bone, fiber and liquids, and I might even be said to possess a mind. I am invisible, understand, simply because people refuse to see me. Back in October of '7, to connect the dots, I happened to look at the Wall Street Journal one day, and I noticed an article with the headline, "Black Professor Rebels Against Expected Campus Role." I read the piece. It looked very interesting. It featured an article in the Chronicle of Higher Education. That was what it was all about. This professor had published an article in the Chronicle of Higher Education, which is the journal of record of the academic community. And the response to that article by the Chronicle from its readers was one of the highest responses it had ever received, both pro and con about the piece. Well, that got my publishing juices flowing, so I called up my son's secretary, because his office gets the Chronicle, I knew that, and she sent me up that issue. I read it, saw where the writer was located, and that's how I happened to then get in touch with Jerald Walker. And what particularly struck me at the time, and I really flipped when I saw this, was the fact that his piece that he had written for the Chronicle that caused all this stir was titled "Visible Man." So that's all the connection of the dots for me that brings us Jerald Walker today.
Thank you, Gerry Gross. Let me connect a few more dots. The final sentence of Ellison's book is, "Who knows but that on the lower frequencies I speak for you." And with that final sentence, Ralph Ellison was attempting to say that although this book is about me and my particular life, it should resonate with every human being, because it's really about a search for identity. And I'd like to think that my book also is about a search for identity. And I think we can use the word discover, because Gerry Gross did discover me. He contacted me, asked if I had an agent. I said, sort of, which means I had one who wasn't working for me very hard. And so he took over the job, and that's why I'm here today. So thank you, Gerry Gross. Thank you to the Brown family for inviting me. And I'm going to read a bit. Two pieces from the book, starting with the prologue, and then I'll read the first chapter. We'll open it up for discussion. If there's time, I'll read a little bit more.